Welcome to Healthcare IT Today. I'm John Lynn, together with my colleague and friend Colin. The world of technology and healthcare are ever changing in new and novel ways, and that's why we love this stuff. So join us as we discuss the latest healthcare and health IT news, meshed together in new ways which help generate ideas and new perspectives. Plus, we'll have a little fun along the way. Today, we're going to be talking about 23andMe and privacy. And be sure to follow the show on social media and the hashtag HITSM and our personal accounts at TechGuy and at Colin_Hung. Plus, check out our 19 years of health IT content at healthcareittoday.com. So, Colin, have you done your genomic sequence?
I have not. I have not done it.
I not either. I did get a pack for free about 12 years ago. And then, like 6 months ago, I found it. And I debated to myself, should I send it in? Like one, I kind of wanted to see how 23andMe would reply when someone submits a pack that's like a decade older. I don't know, it was a long time ago. Uh, and part of me was like, do I want my genomic sequence? Why I didn't do it? Because I was curious, especially back then. I was like, oh, cool, I get a free kit. It was at a conference I went to with Breakaway Group, which was part of Xerox at the time. They're like 4 companies later now. But anyway, I got the free kit and I thought it was a cool gift, as part of a conference. And but I just never brought myself to do it. I didn't, I don't know. Like maybe it was fate that I didn't do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I never got an offer of a kit, but I always had in the back of my mind the whole, well, where's this data going? What is this? Where is it going to be used? And how might it be used? So I was never really comfortable with doing that. So and I never had, honestly, I never had a desire to do it either. So I was like, it didn't really click with me.
Yeah, I was more interested in like the ancestry ones, right?
Sure.
That are connecting relatives and then there's a purpose behind it. They're probably not going to sell it. I'd have to look at the agreement and make sure that's the case. But I've seen people brought together. In fact, one of my favorite TV shows is called Relative Race, and they bring all these people together who've never met their relatives. They were adopted or whatever the story might be. And so I love that. And I love the idea that I could be connected to someone and be a cousin with someone who has never met family. So that part is interesting to me. But yeah, I don't know, there was some hesitancy. I think part of it too, to me, was like, okay, what's the value if I do? Like it was like, especially 10 years ago or whatever it was, like it was the projection of something could come of you having your sequence, but it wasn't really tangible what they would do with it. So
Yeah, no, I think that's the key for a lot of people, right? Is was there anything tangible that came of it? And I think that obviously those questions are being asked now, right? Now that 23andMe is in bankruptcy, but let me ask you, John, what do you think 23andMe declaring bankruptcy means? And what do you think will actually happen to them now that they're in bankruptcy?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting people prognosticating about what will happen. That most interesting response was actually Grace Cordovano. She's like, if you haven't done it already, download your stuff and delete it. And here's a link on how to do it. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And it's cool that 23andMe has that option, but have they really done it? There's a lot of questions there, especially if they're in bankruptcy. Are they going to do it now? Is it too late? I have lots of questions about that. But if I was a patient, I'd probably be considering that, right? Downloading it. So I'd want the data. I paid for it, right? But maybe, delete it because I'm not sure what they're going to do with it in bankruptcy. It feels like a little bit of Wild West. There's not like a lot of great laws behind genomic data that will protect it, or they're not really a covered entity. So it's not really, covered by HIPAA and the data sharing there. And then the other perspective on the bankruptcy is, I saw a really interesting article, a post from Jeremy, who former class guy, who now runs an analytics firm, and surveys and gets data. He's like, I know a lot of companies that would love all that data, right? And Jeremy Bickman's a little bit of a, he likes to stir the pot a bit, but he's not wrong. Like that's a lot of data that payers, health IT companies, EHR vendors, like they could use that data and do some really interesting things with it.
Yeah, I think the for me the most worrying part, I think, for people who are in that database is who is the ultimate buyer of the assets. And we all suspect that the best and biggest asset is the accumulated genetic data that they have on everybody. So, what is that asset worth? Probably a lot. Who are the buyers? And I think so that I think can worry some people, right? If it's a payer, I think people get very worried. If it's a research company, maybe not as worried, right? If it's that kind of thing. So, but yeah, it's a bit of an unknown. Or will the former owner come back and buy it, right? And restart it again. I know Christina Farr, wrote a piece about this and said, there's that possibility, right? That the former owner her theory was that 23andMe was going after a very big market, which was pharma companies. But it turned out that pharma companies didn't know what to do with that genetic data. Like they couldn't make drugs off of it or find people to do the clinical trials based on that data. So in a ironic way, we've disproven the value for a potential buyer. Like I don't think pharma
Yeah,
would be
that's
very interested,
interesting.
right? Because they tried all this time to
Mhm.
make it work, and it didn't work. Clearly, it didn't work. 23andMe is going under. So, yeah, I'm interested to see who might buy them out of bankruptcy.
Well, it is a question. Did it not work, or was it not worth the cost? And now that it's bankrupt, the cost is lower, and then now maybe they could leverage it. Anyway, a little bit TBD in that regard. But that is fascinating that they couldn't make a business out of it, and if they couldn't, why would they acquire it? That's a really good question around that. And that is the core question: is what are they going to do with the data once they have it? Whoever acquires it, and I think it's a little disturbing because the bankruptcy process, which to be fair, I'm not a bankruptcy expert, but as I understand the bankruptcy process, it doesn't really take into account what the acquirer is going to do with the data and do with the company once it's acquired. It's a pretty much an accounting style evaluation of companies and who's going to acquire it and at what price, and basically they're looking at shareholder or at least debtor creditor value, so that they can evaluate getting the most back for them. So that's disturbing, right? Because they're not going to think about what's going to be done with the data after the acquisition. They're just going to look at it from a pure financial standpoint, and that's I think what scares a lot of people.
Yeah, and for me, I think the biggest takeaway from the bankruptcy is that obviously this is nothing to do. This is nothing like Theranos, nothing like that. There was no, at least not right now. There's no corruption, malfeasance. No one lied about anything, right? It was just a business that didn't make it. So, but I do worry a little bit about the pall this might put on precision medicine and genomic data, right? Like I think that's something that I'm going to be looking at in terms of what is it? What does 23andMe mean for bankruptcy? Does that affect those two aspects of healthcare at all, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. And, you highlighted something interesting too, which is, like when Christina Farr was talking about the acquisition and everything, it's like, okay, well, who's going to acquire it? Is it the owner again? And what's the governance once it's acquired? For what they do with it. So yeah, I mean, there's so many questions around this, and and then also how are the patients going to be impacted, right? There were contracts that people paid to be able to get certain services. Are they going to continue those services? What does that even look like? Anyway, I think there's more questions than there are answers.
Well, what do you, John, in your opinion, like, because let's be honest, like this is a big database, like millions of people. I think it was 11 million people or something like that in this database. Um,
11.
uh, you know, we don't actually have any laws, guidelines, or policies about who can or cannot consolidate and have all this data. Um, so are we that far behind? Like, does there need to be some sort of oversight into who owns this much health data, or is it fine to let sort of market forces determine this?
Well, it's troubling, and this is why 23andMe is more troubling, and the privacy issues are more troubling than other companies that have even healthcare data, let alone financial data. If
Mm,
you steal my credit card, I cancel that number, and now it's useless, right? And I create a new one. That works out okay, right? It's painful. We all know that process. It's not fun, but you can recover from it. If you take my genomic data, I can't like change my genome. Like, I mean, we're working on that, right? CRISPR, whatever. Like, we're trying to change it, but like, we literally can't. And so, like, if you steal it, you have it. It's same with biometric data, right? Like, if you steal my biometric data, like, it doesn't really change. Although, it depends on which biometrics. But so I think that's what's troubling about this is that this data, there's no rolling it back. There's no
mm.
canceling it and giving you a new set of genomic data because yours got stolen or got used inappropriately. Like once that data is in the ether, you're done, right? Like that data is out there. And so I think that's what's so scary for me about this is that the permanency of the data as far as our own personal, genomic identity is the way it looks.
Yeah, to me, it's funny. Like people are concerned, obviously, about what will happen to the data as it goes through the bankruptcy process. Um, Surprisingly, I have not seen as much written about the data that got breached, right? Which is part of the cause of, one of the causes of 23andMe going under, was the fact that they had this massive data breach. And so you kind of wonder, to your point, John, like, where's that data? Like, how is that being used or not? Like, this is where it's a bit odd to me because I think it's perhaps more well understood what people can do, what nefarious actors can do with your health record data. But
Mhm.
what could someone do with your genomic data on the dark web? Like, I'm not sure. Like, I haven't investigated it, so I don't know the answer. But it seems
And
a
we
bit
may not
more
know that answer for a decade, right? Like,
right. Exactly.
but a decade from now, it could impact. That's what's scary.
Yes, that's the scary part. Is just it's unknown. It may not be useful today, it may not be very valuable today, but down the road, it could be very, very valuable and extremely risky for people. So I think that's worth talking about. Is these companies and these organizations who hold this very sensitive information. Does there need to be oversight? I'm not saying there needs to be, but it's an interesting question to consider. Right, like your health data. To your point, you can't change that. Your genomic data, you can't change that. I would even go as far as your historic diet information, right? Like that's pretty sensitive information. You can't change that. And does that, for example, down the road preclude you from getting certain jobs or certain types of insurance, right? Because of what you ate too many chips as a kid, whatever,
I
right?
mean,
Like,
that's a fascinating example because actually, that is something you can change where you're like, now I eat super healthy, even though in the past I didn't. But guess what? That data that says you're an unhealthy eater could still follow you, even though you did change, right? Which is actually even almost more disturbing, which is like, you can never repent of your health sins. They're going to
right.
be held against you forever in insurance and for life insurance and health insurance and whatever else. Like, that's actually almost scarier because you can change it, but you're going to still be held accountable for that past transgression.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about that, right? And I think for me, that's what the 23andMe bankruptcy kind of triggers is all these, maybe philosophical thoughts about the sensitive nature of health data and what it means to amalgamate so much of it, because you cannot unhook yourself from it, right? You can't just sort of turn the page and start all over again like you can with a new credit card or a new social, right?
100%.
Hey, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Healthcare IT Today with John Lynn and Colin Hung. Today, we're discussing the 23andMe bankruptcy and its impact on privacy and genomic data and precision medicine. And that's kind of like a nice lead in, John, to my next question for you. What do you think, if anything, does this bankruptcy have for precision medicine and genomic data in general?
Yeah. It is interesting to look at it, right? One, it begs the question, is the value in the data? And I think we know the answer is yes. And this is going to apply to every health IT company. I don't think this is the first one that's going to go bankrupt. I think we're going to see other companies that have a lot of data, and then that value is going to be in the data and what's going to happen. So, I think many organizations are going to say, hey, what are our contractual obligations, our requirements with different companies who are storing our data, particularly true for health systems that have a large amount of data. In many cases, have even sold that data to other companies to be leveraged in different ways. Like, what do those agreements look like, and what's going to be the impact? So I think that's one example. The other one, which I think you mentioned, that Christina Farr said this, I didn't read it myself, but that, hey, they raised too much money. Like, and I get it, the founder got Google, I think she was the wife or girlfriend, I forget, of the Google founder who had a lot of money. She had the ability to raise money, and she raised a lot of money because she could, and it was a big problem, big ambitious goal. That's what people like to invest in, and certainly was ambitious and potentially could have paid off in a big, massive genomic medicine company, and it did get quite big for quite a while. But the problem now is she raised so much to get that return. She has to become a just ginormous company, and so they probably spent money in ways that they probably wouldn't have done if they didn't have to go after this ambitious goal. So I think that's maybe an interesting lesson from this, and is that be careful how much money you raise. And the beautiful part is that the cost of precision medicine, of genomic data, has dropped so dramatically that you don't have to raise as much money. I interviewed someone, I think it was on the CIO podcast or maybe for their interviews podcast, that he was talking about when he did his initial dissertation. If you were able to do one element of the genomic sequence, then that was your PhD thesis, right? He's like, now we can do that for $300, and we do the full genomic sequence, not just one element. And he's like, that's how quick it's changed. And so that's the other message, is we don't need to raise as much money. The technology's there. It's cheaper to analyze it. The sequencing is cheaper. So hopefully that people will see that. And just because you can raise money doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, I think the one thing that for me, that it says, first of all, I do not think that 23andMe's bankruptcy is going to severely impact the movement towards precision medicine, the desire to do precision medicine, and the desire to collect genomic data. I don't think this is such a scandalous thing that people go, oh, that stuff's worthless. Why do we even bother?
Mhm.
Because I think there is value there. However, I do think that this bankruptcy does maybe show that right now doing genomic and precision medicine at scale is not viable.
Mm.
Like, to do it at the scale that 23andMe tried to do it, which is on a massive, I'll call it national level, obviously didn't work. The business model doesn't support. There wasn't enough revenue coming in from these things. So, to your point, like similar to what Christina Farr was saying, it to me, it's not that they raised too much money, although that did happen. Is that they were going after a market that was too large, and perhaps on a smaller scale, it could be more effective, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying the family tree type stuff, like that's perhaps too small, but were there certain diseases that they could help screen for? Is there certain cancers that they could look at, which probably wouldn't have made them billions, but maybe hundreds of millions, right? And that's still a great company, but not at the scale that they were trying to do it at, right? To try and screen for everything. So I wonder about that, that maybe it'll may force people to go, okay, let's see how niche we can get, actually, and not try to scale it that large.
See, and that's kind of the nuance that I would add to what you said, which is I actually think it's maybe that the direct to consumer,
Mm,
genomic model is the wrong model. It does need to be a very clinically oriented, with specific use cases, rather than chasing for some needle in a haystack that this genomic medicine will somehow help millions and millions of people, right? Like, maybe that's the message, at least for now, with 23andMe. And it could evolve as we discover more things and we understand the genomic sequence better. Maybe we could have one that does impact, millions of people, kind of the way GLP-1 is doing in the weight loss space, right? Could we have a GLP-1 moment, for genomic data that could go direct to consumer? Possibly. But I think right now, I don't see that on the horizon. I see what you described, which is very specific diseases. We see it a lot in cancer care, in the treatments, pharmacogenomics. Like those aren't going to be impacted by what happened with 23andMe. They're just going to accelerate. And the database of pharmacogenomic data and what diseases and what diseases or what state of your genome is impacted by certain drugs, that's going to develop. And that's where I think we're going to see the most promise from precision medicine and genomic data. It's not the, hey, let's get everyone's genome and hope we find something that, like, nice idea, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think you're right. I mean, the consumer side of collecting genomic data for no, I'll call it medical reason, might be gone now because of 23andMe's bankruptcy. But then maybe is your point and my point, maybe that's okay. Like, was that really a market anyway, other than finding a lost relative, right? Or becoming part of a family tree you didn't know about. But in terms of knowing your medical history, just because of your genes, like how many people who signed up for 23andMe really, really needed that? And therein lies maybe potentially of how they might emerge, right? As you focus in on just that one small niche of that data, who there is some medically proven value to knowing that information.
Yeah. Well, and the other positive coming out of kind of 23andMe's journey is we all learned a lot, right? Like we learned a lot when it comes to genomic data, what's possible, what's not possible yet. That's valuable. We've learned a lot about privacy. I think all of us are going to, go into any sort of genomic data effort with a little, eyes will be more open to what risks there are associated with this and how do we want to approach it. I mean, these are classic privacy questions. And when you look at it, someone who's healthy cares about privacy. Someone who's going to die in 6 months if they don't get a treatment, guess what? They don't care about privacy. And so it's the same classic thing that we've heard about in healthcare over a lot of years. Sure, yeah, if I'm going to die in 6 months, take all my genomic data, I'm going to publish it online. I'm going to pray that someone's going to find it, and I'm going to discover some sort of treatment, right? But we've seen that, with lab data, with radiology data, it's the same principle. But I think, this educated a lot of us on genomic data and privacy.
Yeah. No, and I think what 23andMe, that's one of the positive things. Obviously, they went through, right, John, like you put it, they helped usher in the fact that you can do a full genomic workup of somebody for like a few $100, right? And the integrity of mailing it in, it worked. Right. I mean, who would have thought that would have worked? They're just mailing in a test kit and then you getting some results back. Now, I know over the years there'll be some funny stories about people getting some results back that clearly weren't theirs, and those kinds of things. But in general, it worked, right? And now it's accepted that this is a form and a way to do genetic testing. So I think there's the positive that. I also think that, to your point, it's raised the awareness that people have in the general public about the power of genomic data. So even though maybe 23andMe didn't live up to that promise, didn't deliver on it, I think people now are at least more aware that, hey, genomic data could unlock a few things here, in terms of my health, in terms of customized medicines that may be available to me down the road, right? Should I need it? So I think that's been a nice silver lining from 23andMe's journey, which we know is not over yet, right? I mean, who knows what will happen as they exit bankruptcy?
Yeah, that's a good point. It'll be interesting to see what do they do next and who they get partnered with. But I think you're right. Like one of the best outcomes of this and positive results is that they showed that at-home testing at scale is possible, right? And we, COVID did that as well and did that in a much more profound way, I think, and impactful. But that is opening up that market. And to be frank, maybe that's why, I know for me, when I saw the COVID test, I'm like, well, yeah, it's not that different than 23andMe. I could do that, right? Like there was some of that thinking that had created this culture that's like, yeah, you could test at home and spit into a bottle and send it in and have it tested, right? Like, and we're seeing that happen across a lot of healthcare. I did it when I had I don't know what it's formerly called. We always call it the snip snip. I had to have a test, and it was all done at home, and I just shipped it in, and then they sent me the results, right? And that's an example of mainstream healthcare, leveraging essentially some of the stuff that they're doing, which is at home testing can be done at scale and effectively.
Yeah, and in fact, that's actually one of the things that might be a silver lining out of this is maybe perhaps that part of the company maybe sold off is the logistics for handling at-home tests. Right, they were pretty good at it at a pretty massive scale. The only other groups that I think would be similar were the during COVID, right, like the public health agencies, and let's be honest, they some of them didn't do very well, right? So I think that be something that positive that comes out of this is that whoever created that, or maybe that whole system gets siphoned off into a separate company, and that can help further the at-home test market. I think the last thing that I don't know if it's positive or not, but I think the investment community that may look at this and go, okay, maybe you don't throw as much money at these kinds of companies, but there is potential here. I mean, and maybe they'll throw money at other companies that were sort of behind, coming on the coattails of 23andMe, but much more focused. I wonder if perhaps 23andMe blazing the trail will help those companies with their investment, seeking investment.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, well, thanks to all of you who tuned into this episode of Healthcare IT Today. You can find more details about our show by checking out the programs page on healthcarenowradio.com. And please share your voice and engage with the community at healthcareittoday.com and on social media using the hashtag HITSM. I'm Colin Hung, along with my friend and health IT collaborator, John Lynn. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.